objectives is that, objectives, learning to write objectives is one of those things where you just kind of go and look at the situation, decide what it is that you need to do, and apply the objective to it. If you do training on a regular basis, you probably develop objectives already for that training. So it gives you an opportunity to really sit down and say, based on the training modules we're doing tonight, I'm going to write some objectives for that training, and it gives you practice on how to do those things. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to talk about the individual meetings that come out of that planning P, where you start down below and work your way up through those different meetings around the planning P and make the racetrack. Excuse me. A lot of times when I talk about the planning P, I refer to the stick part of the P as the entrance ramp to the racetrack. Once you, excuse me, I'm sorry, had chili tonight. Once you get onto the circle part of the P, it becomes a racetrack. You just keep going round and round and round till the operational periods are done. So entrance ramp onto the racetrack. So let's look at the command and general staff meeting. You can see on the planning P down here on the bottom right, that's arrow shows where that planning P location is at for the command and general staff meeting. Your incident commanders have met. They talked initially. The next step on the bottom left-hand side of that P, circle part of the P, that's where your incident commander or unified command gets together and sets the objective. It lays out what it is they want to achieve, where they want to go, what the goals and the direction is for this response during its operational period. At that point, this is the command and general staff meeting. This meeting involves the incident commander and all 8 members, if you have a full 8 members of the staff. They come together in a room, of course, safely with masks and social distancing today. And at that meeting, the incident commander gives the team objectives and the operational period that they're going to operate under. So, that's where they're going to explain to them, we're going to work 12 hours. It's 7:18 p.m. right now. We're going to start at midnight tonight and work a 12-hour shift, or it might be an 8-hour shift, or however that works. That's what we're going to do. And lays out those objectives, ensure safety responders and the public and whatever that may be, establish the perimeter, establish this, establish that, continue this, whatever that is. Then during that discussion process, there will also be a time that the team can ask questions and make sure they have a clear understanding of what the incident commander's views and direction are. You have to understand if they write something and you don't, because that incident commander perspective, again, is that train car or that train view from engine to caboose. They're looking at the whole picture. The incident commander is saying, we need to establish a perimeter. They're not telling you how, and they're not telling you where. That's your job to figure it out. So if you have any questions, if you're going to be the operations section chief to set that up, you have to get those things answered now. If you're planning and have questions about where this is going and what the intent is at the end of that with that perimeter, you need to ask those questions now. If you're logistics, you need to work through those things now. So again, this is the first opportunity to the full team to come together, be briefed by the IC, and them give the objectives, and then you have your marching orders to get the job started. Start to build that IAP, start to build that process. Then you see the arrow moved up to the top left corner to the tactics meeting. Tactics meeting after you've received your direction and your objectives, which is that 202 document, and I believe Andy's going to talk about that here in a little bit for you and have a little exercise to go with it. This is when you're actually building the IAP, the incident action plan for the operational period. It's usually attended by operations section chief, logistics, planning, safety officer, and sometimes some other staff. You might have a resource person or situational leader in there that can help you with the tracking of individual stuff. At that meeting, that's where the operations section chief is going to build a document called a 215 and a 215A, and I'll show you a couple of those here in a minute that were used, I believe, down to Katrina, I believe it was. But that's where they build those things together. They're starting to look at, okay, what organizational chart do I want here? And after I build this organizational chart, what resources do I need to fill that organizational chart? If I'm going to have a rescue group and a suppression group and a medical group and a whatever that may be, I have to make sure I have the resources to fill that capacity. That's where they start to plug all that information in. The safety officer at that point begins to fill out the safety document, begins to look at what do I need to do, what's the safety concerns I have here, and how to address those. You know, does everybody need to wear the reflective vest? Does everybody need to be aware of slip, trips, and falls? Does everybody need additional lighting? Does everybody need whatever it may be? It's too cold, you got to make sure you're bundled properly, whatever those things be, hazardous material, so on and so forth. At that tactics meeting in that top left, that's usually not attended by the incident commander. Again, this is tactical. This is the operations person. This is planning working together to make sure that they're working towards the resources and the safety concerns that are needed in order to institute the objectives the incident commander is given. Okay, so then the planning meeting, the top right corner of that planning P. It's attended again by the full command and general staff, all 8 positions. You have all of them come together. And this is a time to brief on the elements of the plan. So this is where you're going to come together and you're going to educate and explain to the incident commander what it is you're doing, the resources you're using, the direction you're flowing, the things you're going to do in order to meet those objectives. This is the incident commander's first real good look at what the plan direction is to make sure you're achieving their objectives. If not, this is where they can correct the course right now. So they give you the initial objectives, and now you're coming back together, and they're approving the objectives for you to make sure, or approving the tactics and things that you're doing to make sure it moves to meet the objectives that they had in mind in that process. So at that planning meeting on the top right part of the planning P, this is kind of like an agenda or an order how things work in that meeting. And you'll notice the first thing I want you to see is we come down through here, the last person to speak at that meeting is the IC's closing remarks. The reason being is you want the IC to be able to hear everything that's said in the room, and it has any final direction or any final changes, they're the one that says it. They're said, okay, you know, I'm comfortable with everything but this, or I'm okay with the resources but that. This concerns me. And they can work through that as a group right there on the spot, making sure everybody's understanding the changes and the correction that needs to be happening. At the end, the IC is going to tell everybody, I approve the plan as it's presented. And then that's when planning really gets to work and puts us all together in one big package to turn it into that magic document that's an IAP. So again, let's kind of look at the top. Planning section chief reviews the agenda, provides opening remarks, and others, the IC or whoever, operations, provide briefing on current situation. IC reviews incident objectives. Operations section chiefs reviews responders and resources assignments that they have. Looks at the 215, that worksheet that lays out all those resources if you've taken that ICS class, to show what resources you need in order to meet the groups or divisions or things that you have lined out in your plan under your organizational chart. Safety talks about their thing. Logistics gives a briefing on their part of it, including the medical plan. And then each position kind of does a discussion, finance, PIO, logistics, public safety, or excuse me, planning section chief reviews any open actions or tasks that need to be completed or done, solicits feedback from the CNGS, because the planning section chief is the one that has to take this back and put it all into one document. So they have to have a great understanding of what everybody's saying on their part. And unified command looks at it for approval of the IEP. Planning section chief does final comments and direction. And then if everybody's good, everybody's discussed, everybody's briefed, everybody in the room agrees where you're at, you say, incident commander, this is the plan we presented. Do you have any additional comments? And that's where he does his final thing. And the hopes are at that point, after you've had all this discussion in this planning meeting, they say, I approve the plan as presented, let's get it done. Now, the planning meeting, you remember on the top left side of that planning P, there was a tactics meeting early on that pretty much the planning section chief, the operations section chief, and maybe some other additional, including safety, might be in that meeting. Incident commander's not in that meeting. This big 215 up here is the form for resources. So the top left small box there is kind of basically what a group or division would be. Then you go over to the next segment, that's kind of a description of what their duties would be. And then you go over here where you have the individual up and down columns, left and right columns, like a grid pattern. That's where you list the resources that you're going to need, the things that you're going to have in order to fill that division or group, what their job assignment is, and this is what they're going to have resources to make that happen according to what the operations section chief believes is going to need to be done. And these are some that were presented at a planning meeting in Hurricane Katrina. And a lot of times we do them on larger charts, because when you bring it into the planning meeting, everybody can see what your vision is, or you can have, if you have a small one, just make photocopies and give everybody a copy of it. Then down at the bottom, you can also see those are additional supporting documents. So if you need a map, if you need additional things, a different information, comments, whatever, ops and planning or briefing this thing, safety has something, they can post all that out there, and then you can use that as reference material. But again, you can do photocopies if you don't have the big wall stuff. You don't have to make it overly complicated, and that's kind of the process of it as far as those things. Operations briefing. I believe that I'm going to turn this over here under the operations briefing. I believe it's Mr. Kevin Schott is next. I could be incorrect in that, but I think that's who's coming in here. Okay, and here comes Kevin, and I'll turn it over to him now. Or Joe Gasper.
Hi, everybody. I'm not Kevin Schott. This operations briefing that you're seeing here, we actually, when we did this training, we actually used this for when we were at the Fire Service Institute. This was a fire college day, and the people in that tent were the instructors. And what we did was we built an instant action plan to kind of run that specific day at fire college. And what you have here is you have the planning section chief kind of orienting the people as to what's going on at that meeting. Okay, so what we do here is, if you think about it, the presenters at the operations briefing are the command and general staff members. The audience that's sitting out in the crowd is division and group supervisors, strike team and task force leaders, and crew bosses, for lack of a better word, maybe a captain from an engine or a lieutenant or whatever. And they are the people that are actually going to be implementing the resource response. They have been brought to the scene and they're ready to go to work. So you need to brief them on what you're actually going to be doing for this operational period. So remember us talking about the planning section chief? The planning section chief, with most teams, runs all the meetings, okay? So the planning section chief would start the meeting, and he may ask, or she may ask, the instant commander to highlight the objectives, or the planning section chief may highlight the objectives. Because remember, this plan's been built by this command and general staff group, but these people that are coming to go to work for you have never seen the objectives. So you will share that briefly with them, and it's in the instant action plan. Everybody in this meeting has a written instant action plan in their hands, so they can reference that and take notes on it. All right, so they will kind of just highlight for you the objectives. A good example of this is we used a lot of these types of events, this type of situation when we were doing the river flooding. And so we had the people out there and they would brief them on what the actual objectives were for the day, okay? In Katrina, this was done every morning at 6 o'clock in front of Holy Cross College for all the groups that were going to be going out and working on the scene, okay? And the Illinois people, when we went down there, the command and general staff, of course, had to be there because they were doing the briefing. But it was curious that the Illinois people would all show up for the briefing. And then what they started to realize was when they didn't go to work until 7 o'clock, what started to happen was the crowds got thinner every morning, and all they would send was, again, the leaders or the supervisors who were going to actually be involved in it. All right, the next thing is, if you have a technical specialist there, they're basically brought up front to kind of give you an idea of what's going on that day. They might brief on weather conditions. They might brief on the flood conditions. They might brief on meteorological conditions affecting the situation you're in. But what you typically have is those folks who come up. Now, the situation unit leader or the SITL may talk about what's going on. We're not probably, at some of the instances you have, going to go that far down. So the operations section chief would probably come up and say, okay, here's what's going on. You're going to see Andy talk about 204s in a minute. Some of you probably know what that is. Their division and group assignments list. And they would talk about what resources would be applied to a group or a division. Divisions are geographic, groups are functional. In the Taylorville tornado, there were 6 divisions that were the actual search divisions. So what they did was assign resources to go to those divisions and put a division supervisor in each one of those divisions. So we actually had a 204 or a division and group assignment list for each one of those 6 divisions. All right. Then the safety officer would come up and kind of give a quick briefing on things they need to be aware of. The liaison officer might brief on which agencies are there. Don't need to have that person. If you don't have any cooperating agencies there, you're probably not going to have that person brief. The logistics section chief would talk about the 205, which is a comm plan, and the 206, which is the medical plan. The medical plan is for responders, not the public. But everybody needs to be aware of what that comm plan says, because the problem we're running into, again, like we said last night on a lot of these instances, the good old days when you can pick up a portable radio and talk to Illinois State Police, or talk to other resources on the scene, or other fire resources, or police resources, or EMS resources are gone. So you have this 205, which kind of talks about which radio frequencies are being used and who's utilizing those. There have been times, again, the PIO doesn't have to brief, but there have been times the PIO has come up to brief the people to say, here are some things we know that are going on in the situation, here's the public perception. That way, the people that are out working on the scene have an idea. And on larger events, the finance section chief might talk about how you keep time cards and do that stuff. On smaller events, that's obviously not going to happen. And then you have the operations section chief kind of giving them an idea of where they're going to be. A lot of times what will happen is you'll have this meeting, and then people will go off and have a tailboard or whatever kind of meeting they're going to have to talk about those 204s. The operations section chief will say, okay, we're going to send this division over here. We're going to send this division over here. Go sit down and talk to your division soups, see what's going on, and find out what you need to know for specific as to what's going to happen. And then the planning section chief closes the briefing and states when the next briefing will be, which typically they're about 12 to 24 hours apart. Now, in New Orleans, with the number of people we had down there, we had a 24-hour operational period, but we had 3 separate operations briefings during the middle of it because we had shift work going on, and everyone that was down there, all the different departments, came off shift at a different time. Illinois went 24 hours. The FDNY guys went 12 hours. The guys from New Orleans went 8 hours. And so what you really had was you had a briefing to start it, and then as these other people came off shift, you went ahead and did additional briefings. If any of you have ever been involved in any kind of technical or hazardous material response, if you've gone to the Fire Service Institute and got involved in one of the validation exercises, this is what we used to do up there. We would give them a briefing at the start of their operational period so they had an idea of what to do. Once the instant action plan's been distributed, what's going to happen then is you're going to have people executing it. And you might actually have the supervisors and the division group supervisors and the strike team and task force leaders might actually come together and kind of give maybe a report on what's going on and how that's working. All right. So once this thing's implemented, what we want to do is we kind of want to monitor it so that we can kind of see how this is going and how it's happening. So we're trying to keep a pretty good handle on what's going on. All right. The command and general staff meeting is basically a welfare meeting, and it's to bring the command and general staff people together and find out how things are going in the planning process and how things are working. For example, at Katrina, we had this every evening at 6 o'clock, and so we would get together, and here you see other responders would come and talk to us about what was going on during the day. Okay, and we would kind of get an idea of what problems they were actually facing as we went through this. We would send resources out to the scene and put them to work, but what we wanted to do was actually have them come back and talk to us as a command staff and say, what's really going on out there? Are you able to bed down at night? Are you comfortable, in the surroundings you're in? Are there hazards you're dealing with in terms of people or other hazards, personnel, and things you need to be aware of? That was the kind of thing we would bring those folks together and talk about at the end of the day. You can do this anytime during the operational period you want. Some teams do it in the morning, some teams do it at lunch, some teams do it at supper, but it's kind of one of those things where you bring that group back together and kind of talk about what's going on. So if you've got maybe 4 or 5 people building a plan, it doesn't hurt to get them together once the plan's been implemented and let them kind of see what's going on, all right? It gives you an idea to see if you're actually meeting the expectations. Okay. All right. We're going to talk about partnerships. I am going to turn this over to Mr. Kevin Schott. He's going to talk to you a little bit about partnerships and some of the things that you have in the incident command world and then with command and general staff. What I want you to do before Kevin comes here is take a look at this slide. And what we want you to do is take a look at what the incident commander does and how that person fits in here. So let's say, for example, you're an incident commander and you think that the operations section chief and the incident commander would talk a lot. Give them a 1. All right. And we'll let you take a few minutes to do that. And then Kevin will sit down and kind of talk about his experiences with an incident management team.